Namaste. Welcome to this new session. We are considering the Samapatti, which comes in the Sutras of Patanjali 1.41 onwards. And we were trying to decipher the Sutra and those wonderful terminologies used by Patanjali to explain the Samapatti. Samapatti is Samanakarapatti. Samapatti is psychology of Samadhi. And in Samadhi, it's a unique knowledge process. I would like you to go back to earlier sessions where we had discussed something called Yogajapratyaksham. While dealing with epistemology, the pratyaksha pramanam, there we had considered something that is called as Yogajapratyaksa in Indian philosophical systems. The Indian philosophers have endorsed with Yogajapratyaksham, and that is faultless, immaculate, timeless knowledge. As we saw during the last session that we have so many scientific revelations coming in our times, and the validity of scientific revelations is beyond any doubt. But the fact of the matter is that the newer theories are either improving on older theories or setting aside the older theories. The scientific process is said to be foolproof process. But the history tells us that older scientific theories have been replaced by newer scientific theories, and today's scientific theories will be disproved or set aside by the new theories. Those are going to come. So that's how the scientific method, which is evolved by human intelligence, which is for human intelligence, which is by human intelligence, and all these scientific revelations which are man-discovered theories or human inventions and human discoveries. So they have utmost validity in their time, but sooner or later there are changes, there are amendments, there are improvements, there are evolvements, and sometimes they are set aside and sometimes they are replaced by another theory. But therefore they are not timeless. Yes, science reveals you realities, but it is not a timeless reality because it deals with what is called as bhautikam. That's why those shastras, physics is called bhautika shastram. So they have their limitations, and with the paradigm that the science has today, it doesn't seem probable that they will be able to give us ultimate realities about even physical things, because those are evolved in lab processes, by experimentations in labs, or by exalted human intelligence and human intellectual processes. So they are not timeless, but Yogajapratyaksa is something that is timeless. It doesn't get disproved, it doesn't get evolved, because that is, if you recall, all dimensional reality that cannot be had by human empirical process. It needs what is called as intuitive mystic process. And that happens through yogis who are considered to be rishis, the sages and seers. So, something was mentioned about Yogajapratyaksa in the topic of epistemology earlier in Pratyaksha Pramanam. Then again it came back to us in the topic of samprajn Samadhi. So, I would request the student clan to go back to samprajn Samadhi and understand what is samprajnata. It is samprajnana. Jnana, prajnana, samprajnana, sambyak prajnanam. And samprajnat samadhi is the one which gives samyak prajnanam. Now what is this samyak prajnanam? It is not empirical process. It is not a temporal process. It is not a cerebral process. It is an intuitive mystic process. And that is why samadhi comes in intuitive mysticism of Patanjali's philosophy. So, if you recall, when we considered the columns of Patanjali's philosophy, one of the columns was intuitive mysticism. So, yogi's revelations take place in the heart, unlike for scientists, the revelation take place in the brain. And therefore revelations are by brain processes, cerebral processes, brain processes, temporal processes, empirical processes. While for yogi, they are heart processes. They are processed in the heart. When I say heart, it is not coronary heart, it is spiritual heart. It is esoteric heart. And then it is timeless. And it is all dimensional. Now, when it is all dimensional, it cannot come by empirical process, because if you see the front, you don't see the back. If you see the top, you don't see the bottom. So, we know these empirical limitations that we have when we are having actual perception and cognition of an object. It is always a combination of known and unknown. And that unknown is sidelined, and we just claim our knowledge based on the known component of knowledge, and unknown component of knowledge is just set aside. But in this intuitive process, there is no such thing. It is not a combination of known and unknown. Our knowledge is such, whichever realm we have knowledge, there is always something unknown. There is no possibility of having complete knowledge, absolutely complete knowledge at all in our cerebral process, empirical process. That's the limitation of the brain, limitation of human consciousness. So yogi in a turiyavastha, which is the fourth state of consciousness, yogi gets something which is all dimensional. So nothing is left in the knowledge aspect. And this knowledge aspect is by becoming. Like when we say our knowledge, we say, I know the rose, I know the object. We don't become the object. But in intuitive mysticism, there is becoming. So again, in Samprajna, the topic, we had considered this aspect of transformation. So I would request to want to go back and once again have a review of it, where transformation was spoken about. Samadhi is a transformation, and Samadhi is not a trance. And towards the end of the last session, we came to this point that there is transformation. In other words, the yogi becomes that. Whatever yogi reveals in Samadhi, yogi becomes that. And when you become that, then you can understand how it is highly probable and possible that you will have complete knowledge. Uh, so I said I will be telling you about uh, an anecdote where this aspect of transformation is mentioned. And we also saw towards the end of last session that the E is equal to mc square, the equation, speaks about E and me. That is E energy, M matter. Energy and matter both are mutually transformable. E can become M and M can become E when the recourse is taken to C square. Matter can become energy when recourse is taken to C square. C is the velocity of light. And the square of it. So when the matter is put into velocity, which is speed of light, and then the square of mc, then it becomes energy. So even in physics, there is an endorsement to this kind of transformation. If you think that yogi is animate and yogi is spiritual entity, that is the soul in yogi, which is a spiritual entity, that can become matter, and matter can come back to become again a yogi, the sentient. So the E is equal to mc square equation also tells us about the probability and plausibility of transformation of energy into matter and matter into energy. So now we come to that anecdotal incidents which is a recorded history. I am referring to the time at the beginning of 20th century during a Kumbh Mela. So all of you know that there is Kumbh Mela in India, and every 12 years it takes place. And in Kumbh Mela, it is said that the saints and rishis and yogis, they conglomerate in that place. They come from all over, they come from Himalayas, and then they all attend the Kumbh Mela. So it was such a conglomeration in the earlier part of 20th century. The sadhus, the santa, the yogis, the bhantas, they all had gathered at Haridwar. It was Haridwar Kumbh Mela. At that time in early 20th century, the Banaras Hindu University in Varanasi had some professors of physics who were British professors. They were trained in Britain, they were British, and they were professors who got educated in Britain and had become professors in Banaras Hindu University. So they were, they had also invited some of the British professors to join them, and they all joined the conglomeration at Kumbh Mela. Because perhaps the Britishers, they had experienced that such mystics, the sadhus, the miracle men, they all conglomerate at the Kumbh Mela. And therefore, out of fascination, these professors of physics, a band of physics professors, the English professors from Britain, they all had come to have experience at Kumbh Mela. And the Indian professors, along with the Western physicists, the British physicists, they came to meet a Indian person who was called as Surya Vijnani. But there is a Arsha Vignan, there is a Arsha Vignan, Arsha Shastra called Surya Vijnana. And they met at Kumbh Mela. The Surya Vijnani, who had come from Himalayas, and these physicists, they had an encounter at this Kumbh Mela. Now, what is this Surya Vijnana? In Surya Vijnana, the position is like this, that all that matter on this planet is form of solar energy. All this material that is lying on the planet is primarily solar energy. So just as I told you during the last session, from lump of clay you can turn out different shapes. Elephant, tiger, lion, human being, bird, or any other object even. You can turn out from clay material, the China clay. It is such a flexible matter that it can be taken into any shape, and then it can be again crushed into being a lump, and again you can be turning out any other shape out of it. So they say that in Surya Vijnana it is such condition, that everything on this planet is evolute of solar energy. And therefore they claim, the Surya Vijnanis claim, that any matter can be transformed into any matter. Any manifestation can be transformed into any manifestation. This was what they were claiming. And these physicists were keen to have this experience as to how this can take place. So these physics professors, the band of physics professors, collected some tree leaves from a plant around and gave it to this Surya Vijnani, who is a kind of a yogi. Gave it to this Surya Vijnani and said, can you transform these leaves, botanical leaves, into a granite stone? So he nodded his head. He said, okay, it will be done. So they said, you make a slab of granite stone out of these leaves which we have collected. And this Surya Vijnani, he said, yes, it can be done. So please come tomorrow morning. And if you want, you can take the leaves back and bring it tomorrow morning, in case you have a doubt that I might do something at night on these leaves. So you can bring it along with you tomorrow morning, and we will start our process tomorrow morning. So the next morning they all went up on a terrace of a building. And this Surya Vijnani had several lenses, like we are aware of magnifying lens. He had a kit of several lenses with him. And what he started was that he started picked up one of the lenses and brought it under the sun rays, to be rays falling on the leaves. And we know, like magnifying lens, if we take it on any burnable objects like paper or whatever, it would burn after some time. The sun rays would be concentrated and would be falling on the object, and it would be so hot that it would be burnt. So we know that about magnifying lens, what it can do under a sunlight. So he started taking out some lenses, some glasses from his bag, and was using various pieces of glasses and various lenses, projecting the sunlight on the leaves. And after some time, the leaves started they were started burning, and the leaves totally burnt out. And after the leaves were burnt out, you can infer that what would be left would be ashes. This sadhu, Surya Vijnani, continued to be using various lenses and glasses, pieces of glasses in his hands, and changing them, and continued to bring the sunlight on it, on the burnt out leaves of the tree. And gradually, the ash or the burnt out seeds started transforming into different forms, which could be seen by this physicist. And within the matter of about 7-8 hours, when this process continued, then ultimately what they got under the lens was granite stone. So he proved how the tree leaves can be transformed into granite stone, a slab of granite stone, without any miracle. Everything took place under the critical eyes of the scientists, the professors of physics, the physicists, and they could be seeing everything as to what this sadhu was doing, and ultimately they got what they wanted. The tree leaves had now become granite stone. So they questioned sadhu as to, if this is not miracle, how did it happen? So he briefly explained them Surya Vijnana Tantram. So this was his explanation. This is the gist of his explanation rather. He said, you gave me some tree leaves. The tree leaves are nothing but manifestation of solar energy. So that was a manifestation of solar energy itself into a matter, and the matter was tree leaves. So, and what you wanted out of it was granite stone. The granite stone is again nothing but another form of solar matter, solar energy becoming a matter. So these are two different kinds of matters which come from solar energy. Tree leaves on one side is one kind of manifestation, and granite stone on the other hand is another manifestation, and you wanted this to be transformed into that. So what I did was, I devolved this tree leaf into a solar energy form. I devolved it up to an extent from where I could turn out the granite manifestation. And then I started evolving granite stone out of that. And that's how the tree leaves were devolved to some extent, and from there the granite was evolved, and that's how you got the granite stone that you wanted. For that purpose, for the transformation for evolvement and devolvement, I used the various glasses, various lenses, so that the sun rays could be transformed. And therefore, this Surya Vijnana, which is Arsha Vijnana, which is ancient Vijnana of the Hindus, is not a miracle. It is a science by itself, and therefore we call it Surya Vijnana or Saura Vijnanam. And therefore there is no miracle. So they were convinced that this transformation took the leaves back to whatever extent which they could not identify as to what that matter was. And then it was again evolved into a granite stone of which they knew the chemical properties. So they knew the chemical properties of a tree leaf and granite stone, and then testified, yes, that tree leaves have become granite stone. And they were amazed, they were taken aback. And they accepted that it is not necessary that all that is said to be the Hindu sadhus are doing is miracle, but even there is some science behind it. So that's how they were convinced that such transformations are possible, particularly on the terrestrial plane. The point is, such transformation is possible, and therefore the yogi's chitta or yogi's consciousness, which is seemingly a piece of sentiency, the sentiency can become insentient objects such as rose, because for us the rose is an object and it is insentient. Lotus is an object that is insentient. So the sentiency of the chitta can become matter of objects which are grahitru, grahana, grahya in samadhi, and therefore yogi becomes that. And that's why in samadhi it is becoming. If yogi realizes any entity of samadhi such as grahya entity, grahana entity and grahitru entity, yogi's chitta becomes that. It amounts to yogi becoming that. And then he being that, his experience is all dimensional. Unlike our empirical experiences which are not all dimensional. Cerebral processes are not all dimensional. So the samadhi objects in Samapatti are the three categories which we considered in the definition: grahitru samapatti, grahana samapatti and grahya samapatti. And in that case, yogi's chitta becomes the support. So that's how we can have this problem solved, where samadhi mentions the yogi becomes. It is not that yogi sees and yogi knows. Yogi becomes that in samadhi. That is why it is called intuitive mystic process. Now, we looked at Patanjali's Yoga Sutra here. Now let us look into Vyasa's commentary, which will tell us much more about the Samapatti. So, with this background which I have given you so far, that in Samapatti, yogi becomes dhyayakar, dhyanakar and dhyatakar. That is knower, knowing, known. All the three entities. And Vyasa in his commentary opens this out. And as I said, in Samadhi, the objects are always metaphysical. Samadhi will not pertain to our empirical objects, sensory objects, but those are metaphysical objects and not physical objects or sensory objects on which samadhi takes place. So Vyasa explains out. He first begins with Bhuta Sukshma. This is Grahya category. Grahya category, Bhuta Sukshma means Tanmatra, the infra-atomic structure of elements. Shabda Tanmatra, Rupa Tanmatra, Rasa Tanmatra, Gandha Tanmatra, Sparsha Tanmatra, the 5 Tanmatras. Tanmatra. So these are called infra-atomic structure of elements. Much of this will be discussed by us when we come to the topic of metaphysics in Patanjali Yoga Sutras later in the 2nd chapter, where we will be considering Sthula Bhuta, Sukshma Bhuta. Those are 24 principles of Sankhya. So Bhuta Sukshma is one of those 24 principles which are Tanmatra. So Vyasa begins. The yogi's chitta becomes uparakta, becomes colorized by Bhuta Sukshma, because Bhuta Sukshmas come under the crystal, transparent crystal of the chitta, yogi's chitta. And when they come under it, the chitta becomes Bhuta Sukshmakaram. So Vyasa clearly says that chitta becomes Bhuta Sukshmakara, Bhuta Sukshma Rupa. And that is why Bhuta Sukshma Samapatti. That is a kind of Grahya Samapatti. Now another metaphysical principle is Sthula Bhuta. Prithvi, Ap, Tej, Vayu, Akash. The 5 principles, the 5 elements called Panchamaha Bhutas, they are also metaphysical. They are not sensory objects. You don't see Akasha Tattva, you don't see Sparsha Vayu Tattva, you don't see Teja Tattva, you don't see Ap Tattva, you don't see Prithvi Tattva. However, you can see Prithvi, you can see Jala, you can see Teja, you can see Vayu, you can experience Vayu, you can experience Akasha. That is possible in our empirical plane. We do experience all the Prithvi, Aptej, Vayu, Akasha. They are manifestations which are not metaphysical. They are called Panchikruta. They are quintuplicated, which is again a metaphysical topic which will be coming later. So, these are called Vitarka. Vitarkanugata Samprajnata Samadhi. In Vitarkanugata Samprajnata Samadhi, you should recall there are 16 supports which were discussed during Vitarkanugata Samprajnata Samadhi earlier. So, those are called Sthula Alambanam. These are called gross supports. So, by Sthula Alambanam, they become Sthula Alambanakara, and the Sthula Alambana Samanakara Samapatti. So also there are Vaishvik Padarthas. So also in Vaishvik Padarthas there can be Samapatti coming up. So the Grahya Samapatti is again of 3 categories: Vaishvika Vishayas, Sthula Bhutas and Sukshma Bhutas. So the Grahya is again subdivided into 3 by Vyasa: Sukshma Bhuta, Sthula Bhuta and Vaishvik Padartham. So there is that Samanakarapatti. And the Vyasa's description is worth taking note of. So we will do that. I will quote Vyasa's original statements here. So in Vyasa's commentary we have these statements. Bhuta Sukshma Uparaktam, Bhuta Sukshma Samapannam, Bhuta Sukshma Sarupa Bhasam Bhavati. Then, with regards to Sthula Bhutas, Tatha, Sthula Alambanoparaktam, Sthula Rupa Samapannam, Sthula Rupa Bhasam Bhavati. तथा विश्वभेद उपरक्तम विश्वभेद समापन्नम विश्वरूपाभासम भवति. So here the becoming has been expressly mentioned by Vyasa in his commentary. Then he comes to Grahana Samapatti. Please note here that Grahya Samapatti is again of three subclasses, subset. There is a subset of three: Bhuta Sukshma, Sthula Bhuta, and Vishwa Padartha, Vishwa Bheda support. Then coming to Grahana, Tatha Grahaneshu api Indriyeshu api Drashtavyam. Grahana Alambana Uparaktam, Grahana Samapannam, Grahana Sarupakarena Nirbhasate. So, yogi's chitta becomes Grahanakara by becoming Uparakta. By getting drenched in Grahana, it becomes Grahanakara. Then coming to Gruhitru. तथा ग्रहितृ पुरुष आलंबन उपरक्तम ग्रहितृ पुरुष समापन्नम ग्रहितृ पुरुष स्वरूपाकारेण निर्भासते. So Vyasa clearly mentions the becoming, and this becoming is by tatsthata and tadanjanata. Tatsthata means to be established in the forms, and tadanjanata means taking the form of objects. So, yogi's chitta gets established in the form of supports, and then that is samapatti. So, the point is, Vyasa clearly mentions about the transformation of chitta, which is usually our mindset, mahad buddhi ahankara. That in samapatti becomes the support or the content of samadhi. Having mentioned Grahitru Grahana, about Grahitru it is also important to note, he brings one more class here. That is Mukta Purusha Uparakta, Mukta Purusha Alambanam, Mukta Purusha Uparaktam, Mukta Purushakare, Mukta Purusha Swarupakarena Bhasate. So the Grahitru principle, the metaphysical principle of self, so it quintessentially is like Mukta Purusha, because a Mukta Purusha, liberated self, doesn't have any manifestation, any form, any avatar, any incarnation. So it is liberated. And therefore, yogi gets a pre-sight of even liberation as to what would be liberation. And you should recall that on earlier occasion we had mentioned about this, and this will come in the second chapter in Patanjali Sutra itself, that yogi has experience of Kaivalyam before the Kaivalyam. So he gets a taste of Kaivalya, which is the Viveka Khyati Aviplava. So when the means of Kaivalya are attained, the means give him a sight, a pre-sight of what would be liberation. Because it's an unknown realm otherwise, and therefore it won't be comfortable condition when the self becomes liberated, because all gravities fall apart. So yogi gets that very experience of what really the kaivalya is, what really the moksha is, and therefore in grahitra samapatti there is a purusha alambanam uparakta, purusha alambana samapanna, purusha alambana swarupakarena samapatti. But then he also brings another class of grahitra samapatti, which is mukta purusha. So therefore, this immaculate, transparent chitta has a great excursion going through the all metaphysical revelations and realizations by becoming. And that's why very apt word by Patanjali, Samapatti. Samapatti is Samanakarapatti, becoming of the same form. So, that is how the transformation has been explained. The point to be noted here that the Samapatti here are of three classes. Grahya Samapatti, Grahana Samapatti, Grahitra Samapatti. Grahya Samapatti are of three kinds, which we saw. Sthula Bhuta, Sukshma Bhuta and Vishwa Padartha. The Grahana Samapatti is also with reference to the instruments, that is senses. The senses, Jnanendriyas, and also the Antakaranam. Because it is the mind which is also instrument for our knowledge. So chitta itself becomes the object of chitta. When it becomes the pure chitta, transparent chitta, really realizes the chitta, which is instrument of all experience and all knowledge. And then, so those are again two categories in Grahana Samapatti. One is external senses. So the chitta takes the form of external senses and understands essentially what the external senses are, which we call as Jnanendriyas, and also takes for support the internal Indriya, which is called Antakaranam, the internal organ of mind. So there are two aspects in Grahana Samapatti, and in Grahitra Samapatti again there are two. One is subjective entity, the Purusha Tattva, the locus, the substrate of subjective entity, which is Purusha Tattva, and then Mukta Purusha. So these are the classes of Samapatti which are mentioned. So which tells us about which are the subject matters in which Samapatti can occur. So Grahya are the Vitarka and Vichara category. The Grahana Indriyeshu. Indriya means either external and internal. And Grihate Aneneti Grahanam Indriyam. So Indriyam means these are 5 external senses and 1 internal sense. And one of the commentators makes it clear that there are 13 aspects in Grahana. Trayodasha Vishayam Samanyam. That is 5 cognitive, 5 conative, and 3 internal. 5 plus 5 plus 3. So there are Sukshmendriyas, Thulendriyas in Indriya Samapatti or Grahana Samapatti. And the Grahitru is Asmita. Asmita padam hi gruhita purusha iti bhavaha. So where the very knower is known. In empirical process, in our knowledge process of the world, our world, we do not know the knower, but we know all the knowables. The knower is never known. All that is around us will be known. All that is not you is known. So whatever is yours will be known. And whatever is not yours but around you will be known. Whatever is not yours but for you will be known. But you will not know you. And to know you by yourself is Adhyatma, which is not the subject matter of modern science. I recall a Upanishadic statement from Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, where Yajnavalkya makes the statement to his disciples, Vijnataram mare kena vijanayat. Hey fellow, how will you know the knower himself? I know myself in spiritual process is that. That means Atma knows the Atma, the self knows the self. Atma establishes and gets established in Atma and then experiences Atma. So this is only in spiritual process, Adhyatmic process, Paramarthika process that it can happen. So that is what this Samapatti is. Now we have come to a very interesting topic here. Incidentally, we have fumbled upon a very interesting topic, that the very I becomes known. I becomes knowable and I is known. The knower himself is known. In Grahitru Samapatti, what is the object? Subjective entity itself is object. While in other cases, something external to us is known. Grahya Samapatti, Grahana Samapatti, which is not we ourselves and we know it. But in Grahitra Samapatti, we ourselves know ourselves by ourselves, by being in ourselves. So that is the Aham Tattva. That is the pronoun I. Now, whether this pronoun I is object and subject, or merely object and merely subject, or both, now this is an intriguing question. I know myself. If you decipher this statement, who is the knower? You are the knower. Who is known? You are known. Through which are you known to you? Through you. So, understand this mysticism. The Grahya is I, Grahana is I, Grahitru is I, which is called Asmita Samapannam Chittam, Asmita Samapatti. So, where the objective entity is oneself, instrumental entity too is oneself, subjective entity too is oneself, and what is known by all this is subjective entity itself. So this is little brain spinning condition that we come across, and therefore we are embarking upon, as an incidental topic to Samapatti here, the Aham Tattva, the principle of Aham, the principle of pronoun I, because otherwise pronoun I is just a proverb for us. But then what is it? What is the principle on which we have the idea, notion, experience of pronoun I? So the Atmanishtata has Vastunishtata. Therefore, in self-knowledge, the self itself is objectified, for the self itself to be knowing itself. So this is quite an enigmatic condition that we have fell upon. We have fumbled upon it. So, little bit of that. We will look into that for a while, which will be brain spinning, which will be very intriguing. That self objectified. Self objectified by the self through the instrument of itself. So, what is called as Atma Sakshatkara? Because we are familiar with the Atma Sakshatkar of a yogi. So, what is this Atma Sakshatkar? Where yogi becomes what he is, and therefore he knows what he is. We all do not know what we are. And a worldly man, materialistic man, doesn't want to bother about that. And that's why worldly man is to be instructed. Who are you? And then thou art that. You are that. And that is the spiritual experience. So that's the Atma Sakshatkar. So let's consider for a while this aspect, which is a allied aspect to the text. The text of Patanjali doesn't bring it here, but he has brought the Grahitru Samapatti, and therefore we are slightly making a deeper investigation into it before we proceed to the text. So that we will consider next time. The self objectified, the self knowing the self, self realizing the self, self becoming self. We need to become ourselves. We are not, we think of us. I am a man, I am a woman, I am Oriental, I am Occidental, I am Eastern, I am Western, I am of this caste, class, creed, gender, status, stature, etc., and ethnicity, etc. This is what we know about what we are. We are not really that. We are not at all that. We are pure consciousness. And therefore we need to know ourselves. And in spiritual pursuit, that is the major pursuit. Who am I? Am I what I think of me, myself? That I am a man, I am young, I am old, I am strong, I am weak, I am intelligent, I am stupid, I am Occidental, I am Oriental, I am of this faith and that faith, this ethnicity and that ethnicity. Are we really that? Not at all. So that's the question that we are going to take up. But that is for next time. Namaskar all of you.